So welcome back to our mini-series on meditation for beginners. Last week I already had the chance to talk to you about what we actually mean by meditation and also some of the scientific research which has shown the benefits of meditation as well. It all sounds very good, doesn't it? But what is interesting and what we're going to look at this week is exactly how meditation can work to bring us all these wonderful benefits. Some people wonder whether meditation is in fact something scientific. And in fact, although it's not science in general, but there are many things about meditation which we can explain in a scientific way. And what I'd like to do today is to explain in a fairly scientific way about how we can account for all these wonderful benefits which we get from meditation. In fact, most of the problems which we deal with on a personal basis from day to day come from the fact that our body and mind tend not to be in balance. Often they are separated. Our body may be in one place, but our attention or our awareness may be in another place completely. You may think again that there's no problem with that, but in fact the further away the mind goes from the body and the longer it is away, the more problems and the more suffering it tends to bring us. You may wonder why the mind would want to go away from the body in the first place. Well, there are many things to tempt the mind outside the body. Can you imagine the scenario of wandering along a shopping street and seeing something you like in a shop window? Supposing it's something like a diamond ring. The moment you see a diamond ring you like, what you find is that your mind is attracted outside the body and it's with the diamond ring rather than with yourself. This is a case of our mind being attracted outside our body by something which we like too much. At the same time, our mind could also be attracted outside our body by things which we don't like. You'd think your mind didn't want to stay with things which you don't like, but in fact this is often not the case. If you imagine again that you're walking along the street and you see someone you hate, what you find, especially if you want to punch that person on the nose, is that your mind is more caught up with that person than it is with yourself. So also because of hatred, your mind can be drawn outside the body. The longer your mind is away and the more time your mind spends away, the more suffering which you manage to bring for yourself. That's not the only thing which happens to your mind. In fact, it uses up a lot of mental energy as well. Some of you may have jobs in which you sit at your desk all day long. You may not move a muscle at all. Maybe all you do all day long is to think about your schedule for work or to plan strategies for how to make a profit in life. But I'm sure you agree that at the end of the day you feel exhausted. But it's not physical exhaustion, it's mental exhaustion. And the fact that you've been pushing ideas and thoughts around in your mind all day long. Again, this comes from the fact that your mind is active, it's traveling here and there all day long, consuming a lot of mental energy. What we try to do with meditation is to bring the mind back inside the body, to bring the mind back from all those temptations and distractions back to its real home in the center of the body. If we can manage to do that, the first thing which we manage to do is to save an awful lot of mental energy. Instead of consuming mental energy with going here and there, what we manage to do is to conserve all the energy which we usually dissipate into other things. Once we use less energy, surprisingly enough, the amount of metabolic rate which we need in our body is also reduced. Even on the level of common sense, this is intuitive to us. I'm sure many of you have found that when you're worked up, when your mind has a lot of things going through it, then you find yourself breathing deeply. You find yourself sweating sometimes as well if you are upset. But once your mind is brought back inside yourself, these sort of reactions of the body are reduced a lot. And this is a sign that our metabolic rate is actually being reduced. So once we have brought our mind back inside, the metabolic rate will start to fall. This is a response to the fact that our thoughts are more centered inside ourselves. Once we have a lower metabolic rate, because there's less consumption of food and energy in our body, what we find is that the oxygen which we need for our body to function is actually reduced in its demand. So we find that instead of breathing deeply or instead of breathing heavily, we find ourselves breathing in a more subtle way, in a more refined way. And again, this is intuitive, that when we feel calm, often we find that our breathing will become relaxed as well. However, when we are worked up, our breathing may be much more coarse and much heavier. But once we start to relax, we find that our oxygen consumption is reduced and our breathing will become more shallow. Once the breathing becomes more shallow, the next thing which happens is that the number of thoughts stirred up in the mind by our breathing will be reduced a great deal. It's rather like the metaphor of the ocean, in which when the wind stops blowing, there are hardly any waves on the surface of the ocean anymore. In the same way for our mind, once we stop, and the same thing with our mind, once we have shallower breathing and more relaxed breathing, then the number of thoughts which are stirred up in the mind become much less. And this brings us full circle, because once our thoughts become less, then in fact less energy is required. Once even less energy is required, our metabolic rate will decrease further. The level of oxygen will also decrease, and the shallowness of our breathing will become less and less. So what we see is a sort of positive feedback loop, by which the more our mind is centered inside our body, the less consumption of energy, the less consumption of oxygen, and eventually there will be a reduction of thoughts in the mind as well. And the thoughts will be reduced more and more until we come to the point where there are no further thoughts in the mind anymore. At this point, we come to a condition which we call a standstill of the mind. In fact, it's not the mind that has stopped, but it's the thoughts which have stopped. Once the thoughts stop, then our mind can switch over into a new mode of functioning, a way of functioning which doesn't require us to think anymore, but by which we can draw directly on things like insights and intuitions and especially gut feelings in the mind, where we can know about things without having to think about them. But what is important from the point of view of our meditation is that once the mind becomes stopped in this way, there will be a very special thing happening inside us, which is there will be an arising of light inside us. It's not a light that comes from outside, but it's a light which will occur in the mind. And it's this sort of light, especially at the center of the body, which allows us to see more about ourselves, see about things which we cannot see with the naked eye. And the more we can see, the more we can know. When our level of knowledge increases, then we can start to discover many of the secrets which are normally hidden for us about the nature of life and reality, many things which we never knew before. So this is exactly how meditation can help to bring us into a state where we have brightness inside, where we can have knowledge which is not accessible to those who never meditated before. By now you might be wondering where this brightness inside us could have come from, because it's not something which we had before. But in fact, brightness is something which we have always had inside us. It's just the case that the brightness which we always had has been scattered in many different places. If you take a look at this torch here, you find that there's something very important missing from it. Normally a torch is something which we can use to light up a room, to find things in the room around us. But when we have a torch like this, which has its lens missing from it, then although it consumes the same amount of energy, and although it has a bulb which is working properly, in fact we cannot use the torch for anything useful at all. Why? Because all the light from the torch is in rays which is scattered in different directions. But what we've done when we have practiced the meditation is that we've taken all the different rays of light, which before were scattered in different directions, and we have focused them together into one single beam. This is seen in the second photograph here, where we find that the lens on the torch has been replaced. Instead of all the light being scattered in different directions, now it is all focused in the same direction. Just now, when we were talking about bringing all our thoughts back to the center of our body, we've done exactly the same thing with our mind. Instead of allowing our thoughts to be scattered here and there with the things that we like or don't like, or even to different parts of the world, in the case of people thinking about the other side of the world, now we have brought all our thoughts back to one single point in the center of our body. And when we do this, what we find is that our thoughts are now going in the same direction. And in the same way, all the light inside ourselves, which before was scattered in different directions, now comes to a visible focus in our center. And it's this sort of light which allows us to see dimly at first, and later much more brightly, just all the secrets which we have inside ourselves. In the beginning, the light may be rather dim, or maybe it will be as if you can hardly even see it at all. Some people describe in their meditation that it's like being in a dark room where they can only see the outlines of the objects in the room with them. But later, as their eyes adapt to the darkness, then they can see more and more of the room around them. It's the same thing with the meditation. With practice, the level of brightness will start to grow inside us, rather like a lens on a torch which becomes more and more focused, allowing us to have a very powerful tool to examine the nature of the world around us and the nature even of ourselves. Sometimes it's easy to comment on the things which we see in the world around us, but the last place we ever look is inside ourselves. Sometimes other people know more about ourselves than we do, but once we have a brightness inside ourselves, we can start to learn about the real truths of the things inside ourselves. We don't need to wait for other people to give us encouragement, but we can give ourselves encouragement from the inside out. So these are some of the things we can do when we do this magical trick of starting to focus the thoughts inside our mind, rather like the torch, where by focusing the beams of light we can have something very powerful. The light inside the mind can be more powerful than any of the lights which we've seen in the outside world. Some who have meditated have said that the light inside can be as bright as the midday sun, or even brighter than that. So this is something which we can look forward to our meditation to. This is something which we can look forward to in our meditation once we become more proficient. This is all I'd like to leave you with from the point of view of the theory of meditation for today. But next time round we'll be looking more at some of the attitudes which can help us to study meditation in more efficient way. And these will be some of the things which I'll be talking to you next